The Theater History Podcast is supported by HowlRound, a Knowledge Commons by and for the theater community. It's available on iTunes and howlround.com.
Hey everyone, a quick note before we begin. You're probably going to notice that the audio quality on this episode is, well, not great. We've been dealing with some technical problems over the last few weeks with the Theater History Podcast, but it looks like we've got them resolved, and hopefully we'll be just fine going forward. This is going to be a little bit of a rough listening experience, but the interview was so good that we just didn't think that we could ditch it entirely. I hope you're able to look past the problems with the audio and enjoy this really great conversation with Kyle A. Thomas and Carol Symes. Thanks so much for your patience, and thanks as always for listening.
Hi, and welcome to the Theater History Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Leager. You might not see many productions of medieval theater nowadays, but as today's guests demonstrate, there's a rich and rewarding tradition to explore there. We're joined today by Kyle A. Thomas, who's a doctoral candidate in theater at the University of Illinois, and is producing a 12th century work called The Play of Adam at the Met Cloisters in New York on December 17th. We're also joined by Dr. Carol Symes, who's an associate professor of history, theater, and medieval studies at the University of Illinois. She produced the translation of The Play of Adam that they're using in the performance, and you can find that version in the Broadview Anthology of Medieval Drama. Carol, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I wonder if you might describe a little bit about The Play of Adam. When and where is it from, and what's it about?
Sure, I'll start. So The Play of Adam survives in a single manuscript written in southern France in the 13th century, but the play itself probably dates from the middle of the 12th century. It's largely composed in the French vernacular that was spoken in England, which is often known as Anglo-Norman French, but it also has stage directions and other material, including Latin chant in Latin. It seems to have been composed, even though the manuscript is from southern France, it seems to have been composed for audiences in England, who would have been many of them French-speaking at that time, and it's clearly meant to be performed for a popular audience. Would you say, Kyle, an urban audience?
Yes. Especially given that they're one of the things that we did with the show a few years ago was do a staged reading of the performance to look at the possibility for how many actors would have been needed to put this on the stage, and that's important because it informs a little bit about maybe how this play would have traveled if it had gone around to multiple areas, and how difficult it would have been simply to stage it, and the resources needed to do that.
Yeah, because the play has about 15 or 16 characters, and the argument that I have made and that we tried out and proved is that you could do it with as few as 4 actors. And of course that also lends an element of comedy to it, because essentially actors are running off stage and throwing off one costume piece and coming on as a different character entirely. And that's going to be the model that we use in the Cloisters production too.
Carol, I think you mentioned the stage directions, and this is really an interesting part of sort of the history of this play. One of the only examples that I'm aware of a play from so long ago where we know more or less how you're supposed to put it on.
Yeah, it's wholly unusual. I mean, there are only other couple of examples of medieval dramas from this time that have such rich stage directions. There's 2 plays from Benedictbeuern, which was an abbey in Bavaria, that survived with good stage directions, and the play that Kyle is writing his dissertation on, the play about the Antichrist, also has really interesting stage directions. But Adam really kind of is hands down in, you really get a visual sense of what the impact of the performance is supposed to be. And of course, it means that for the designers who are working with us on the production, there's a lot for them to work with.
Stage directions are unique too, because for this particular type of drama, given that we're interpreting them as stage directions, but to what degree were they trying to control the performance? What degree were they freeing the actors for performance, improvisational technique, that sort of thing, is really one of the things that we like to explore. And what's really unique about this production is that we're actually going to have a character who is going to be embodying those stage directions for us in the performance, because there's some indication that as an expository voice, these stage directions, even in drama or dramatic instances earlier than this, that there was this sense of control or directionality that they were, whoever wrote it down was trying to kind of imbue within the performance to some degree.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be on stage reading the stage directions and interacting with the actors in a way that will be very familiar to your listeners from Thornton Wilder's Our Town, for example. I mean, that is, and I don't think that's at all an imposition on the play, because there's often really amazing moments of comedy that can emerge as the actors listen to what the stage directions are, and which may or may not match up with what they think they're supposed to be doing.
They're really fun because sometimes the stage directions say things like, speak the line clearly so that everyone can hear, which is something that you think would go without saying when it comes to a play text of any kind, but it's great to hear that almost as the play instructing you as the actor to, hey, you have to say this clearly so everyone understands what we're doing with this.
Well, if I can share a few others, I mean, you say, Carol, that, I mean, the actual title of the play itself, we call it The Play of Adam, but more or less the real title translates to The Format for Representing Adam. So it's sort of right there in the title. And then there are moments, later on, for instance, there's technical stuff. They stage the sort of moment where Cain kills Abel. So you have the technical details for that, but before that, in your translation, Carol, you have the stage direction, Cain will make a nasty face at Abel.
I know, and we're still looking forward to exploring that with the actor. You know, like, does he forget to make a nasty face, and so I'm cueing him to make a nasty face, or what's going on?
There's so many great options for that. It's such a fun dynamic to play with from a directorial perspective, because, like as Carol mentioned, what does that indicate? Is there some idea that the actor playing Cain forgets to do that, or is not doing that, or maybe makes the wrong decision to look at him lovingly before he's, corrected to then be mad and angry at him? So there's lots of different layers that we can look to unpack in the rehearsal process as we get close to performance. Yeah,
and there's also that you picked up on a great moment where, because it goes on to say that the way that there's almost like the Steven Spielbergian kind of, a special effects here where Abel's supposed to have a pot inside his cloak or whatever, so that when Cain hits him over the head, it makes like a clunk.
Yeah.
So we're going to have a lot of fun with that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
What about the language? One of the interesting things about the language you mentioned is that this isn't in Latin, which is normally what you would expect for a play from this period.
Yeah, I call this the earliest surviving vernacular drama of medieval Europe. That's not quite true if we think about the whole spectrum of theatrical activities that would have gone on in medieval Europe. I would count among those activities epic poetry, chanson de geste, troubadour poetry, fabliaux. I mean, in other words, there are all sorts of performative materials that survive from the Middle Ages that are in either French or other vernaculars. But this is the first time we have a fully scripted play. There's another play from the 12th century called the Play of St. Nicholas, which I've worked on, which is probably contemporary to the Play of Adam, but the manuscript that we have is the late 13th century. So this is really our first fully formed vernacular dramatic artifact, and so that's pretty extraordinary. And then the fact that it not only is it the first, but it's pretty darn good play. I mean, I think that just it's so worthwhile aesthetically as a comic tragedy. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things is the way the author would have used meter, because there's two sections that are coming to mind now where Adam, he has these two long laments that he gives, and one is in octosyllabic and the other one is decasyllabic, I believe, correct? And in the octosyllabic, it moves a little quicker, it moves a little faster, the lines are kind of more clipped and short. There seems to be a bit of a humorous element to it. It's before God really comes in and puts the smackdown on Adam and Eve for eating the apple. Then later, after they're expelled from the garden, there's this really long decasyllabic lament that Adam gives, and he blames Eve for his problems, he blames his own sinfulness, he blames a lot of things, and it's heavier. The pace of it really slows down. So you can tell that whoever wrote this, whoever put these things together, really understands the idea of language in performance, spoken language, and how it's different. And how even though we're dealing with an Adam who is very feeling very sorry for himself and very sad about his situation, and is communicating that in very deplorable terms and everything, that in one way that can still be comedic. It can still be funny and light and almost be tongue-in-cheek. But then you can turn it around in one fatal swoop of the quill, so to speak, and turn it into something much more poignant, much more with much more weight and gravitas to it. So whomever put this performance together really understood the performative elements of language and how to put that down onto paper as well.
And the different registers. I mean, it really, I think another sort of touchdown that your listeners will be familiar with is the way that Shakespeare, switches, sometimes embeds sonnets in his plays, switches from blank verse to, prose, especially for comic scenes or for lower class characters, quote unquote. And most of this play, in rhyming octosyllabic couplets, is really, it's very hip hop. It's very, it's slangy. I try to capture that in my translation, that the language that's being used here is, it's not language that you would, the French that's being used here is not the French of a courtly romance. It's very, very street. Yeah, very much the everyday. I think vernacular is the perfect way to describe it, because it very much is the everyday language of the people. And I think this hits upon another important point, too, in why we're staging this, is because as medieval dramatists, we often find ourselves lamenting the fact that we don't have enough really good performance-oriented translations of these plays. And it's great to have someone like Carol who understands, because she is also an actress, that when you're looking at these translations and you're trying to create a piece for performance, that as you translate, you're understanding how that language works, how it sounds spoken aloud and performed, and what it's working towards and working against as well within the text. So it's really fantastic to have this new translation where we're beginning to unpack these ideas of the everyday language, the street language, the slang, and how the vernacular is working, and then updating it and providing in modern English some of those kind of characteristics as well. Yeah, and in so many ways, what I strive to do is to do what the play itself is doing, which is to reach out to its own contemporary audience and to speak to it in a language that audience finds comfortable. So the playwright of the play is doing that, and I, as translator, am trying to do that. To the extent that I'll use quite contemporary slang, in modern English to convey that.
We're talking about the 21st century production that you guys will be doing in December, of course. I wonder just briefly if you could put us in the shoes of someone watching this in the 12th century. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? What maybe contemporary issues are being raised that they might have an understanding of?
Yeah, great question.
Good question, yeah.
Because, this play, it's the story of Adam and Eve, the story of Cain and Abel. The manuscript is a fragment. It's unfinished. We don't know how the play was supposed to end. I hypothesize that it would have ended with the birth of Jesus, whose coming is constantly being mentioned in the play. So it might have been a Christmas play. But Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel in this play become every people, every woman, every man. And so, ostensibly the issue is Adam's betrayal of God's trust and Eve's sinfulness, but the play is all about a dysfunctional marriage, essentially. I mean, it's a dysfunctional family relationship between
dysfunctional community, really, too.
Dysfunctional community, yeah. And so Adam and Eve are like 12th century people in a medieval town, say London or Canterbury. They're sort of an upwardly mobile couple living in a newly urbanized society, because towns were quite new in the 11th and 12th centuries. And they're struggling with the kinds of new gender roles that brings. They're struggling with, probably maybe problems of money. In this play, the Satan character is really kind of like a slick, kind of door-to-door salesman kind of guy who gets Eve in trouble. So the audience is seeing their own predicament, their own desires, their own conflicts being played out, and it's being played out at the register of sacred history, but it's also being played out at the register of their everyday dilemmas.
I think Carol hit this the nail on the head in this. And I think that there's a larger kind of social commentary going on as well, because you have this introduction of this character who's Jewish, who kind of is a representation of Judaism within the play as well. And he begins a theological debate, touching on issues that would have been discussed in the period, and questions that were being brought up based upon kind of new theological learning and new texts coming into.
Yeah, the character, he's just called the Jew, and of course, on one level, he's just an unfortunate package of medieval anti-Semitic stereotypes. But on another level, what the playwright does is really dignifies this character by putting into his mouth all of the latest scientific knowledge and Aristotelian philosophy, which is being taught in medieval universities. So he's, we're going to be playing him as a scholar, as a sort of annoying, intellectual, because he comes in and he challenges the Old Testament prophets and says, you keep Isaiah, particularly, Isaiah comes on and prophesies the future virgin birth, and this character comes out and says, scientifically that's impossible, and really kind of pushes every single button that Isaiah has. And so the role that this figure plays is to embody the new knowledge that's really causing a lot of doubt and uncertainty.
Yeah.
At the time.
And this is a knowledge, because this is a play that where the audiences are the everyday people, they're bringing up this question amongst the folks of the town.
It's risky, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because the other thing that does, and I love this about medieval drama, is that it also stages, it forthrightly stages people's own doubts.
Yes.
In other words, rather than pretending that, all this theology makes total sense, it allows the audience to have an experience with this character, a moment of doubt, and then, as we're going to do in our production, it shows them the virgin birth.
Yes.
And it shows them that, that it's okay to have these doubts, but that if they have faith, they'll see that these things are real. So that character is so necessary to the play, and we're trying to do, I think, probably the most violence, quote unquote, that we're doing to the play is we don't want to sort of roll on this anti-Semitic character. We're going to strip him of that Jewishness, which is not mentioned. And again, he's the Jewish news is not mentioned anywhere in the text except for in his name of his character. So basically, just by not even talking about that, we can allow the audience to experience with that character this injection of doubt.
Absolutely.
Well, and it's an interesting reflection of another sort of performance, you could almost say. Carol, you note this in the introduction to your translation. There were these, certainly during the 12th century, these sort of staged debates between Christians and Jews, which, as you say, kind of had a predetermined outcome.
Yeah, there's a great book on this by my colleague Alex Melbikoff on medieval disputation. What Alex shows there is that there probably were, there would have been real moments in the history of Christianity and Judaism when Christians and Jews debated together. But by the 12th century, the status of the Jewish community in Christian Europe is so precarious that any of these debates that would have gone on the deck would have been very much stacked against the Jewish interlocutor. But that said, many medieval intellectuals really valued, many medieval Christians actually wanted to learn Hebrew so that they could read the Old Testament. There were sort of pockets of interest and knowledge about Hebrew in medieval Europe, not as many as we wish there were. So some people in the audience, maybe not everybody, but some people in the audience would have been aware that such debates occurred. Maybe once in a while, maybe there would have been audience members who had witnessed one, but it really is almost like a play within the play in that sense.
Yeah.
By putting, and of course, again, the other thing that not that Shakespeare would not have read the play of Adam, but there's remarkable. Isn't it remarkable how courtroom drama basically, it's so reminiscent of Shylock and Portia. The way in which putting something on trial is such a huge part.
We still do it today.
Exactly. Law and Order shows that there's something about that judicial moment that is inherently so dramatic, and to have that embedded in the play is pretty awesome.
Well, I think that's mostly where medieval drama actually comes from, is the courtroom. And
and in fact, and Jody Ender is another great scholar of medieval drama, argued that in a very important book in the 1990s, that one of the sources of medieval drama, I mean, obviously the liturgy and worship is a source, politics and popular culture and everything that's just as today, theater is a reflection of what people care about, what people are worried about. So this play is coming out of that place too, but it's also drawing on ancient and medieval rhetorical traditions that Kyle's also talking about in his dissertation.
Speaking of this sort of longer tradition, briefly, you guys are the first medievalists that we've had on the show, so yay. But maybe just briefly situate the play of Adam within this longer history and spectrum of medieval theater, medieval performance.
Well, do you want I guess you want our perspective and not
you want our narrative and not the bad narrative.
The standard narrative of theater history. Well, I'll speak from my perspective. So I'm coming at this specifically from an angle of theater and performance. I'm not a officially trained medieval historian, I suppose, but in my dealings with it as a part of my graduate work and my dissertation and all those other things, one of the things that I've been really key on is that the Middle Ages are a highly theatrical period of European history, particularly for Western Europe. And there's so much about this period that I think that needs revisiting. And one of those things is the way that which these texts that we have that have survived and come down to us, in what ways are they being informed by an obvious theatricality within the culture that is producing them? We know this because, as Carol has argued, and argued very, very convincingly, that there's these laws, these decrees and other things that are going out that are trying to limit or to control or to focus the theater or performative aspects of the culture. For a very long time, the narrative has been that level of control really stamped out a lot of the theater and performance that was going on. And if that were the case, you wouldn't have to need to revisit, constantly the fact that, we have to make a law that says people can't be doing this theatrical thing anymore. If you have to keep saying that, then people are still doing it.
Right.
So we're trying to kind of revisit this narrative of theater history that has said for so long that essentially after the dissolution of much of the Roman imperial control, that theater and performance and stuff just disappears, that it dissipates, the theaters themselves go away, and people stop doing drama of any kind. And there's lots and lots of evidence that just is not the case. And so we're trying to kind of unpack and create new ways to look at documents, things that don't on their face look exactly like plays, the way that we look at plays today, but are themselves asking for people to perform them, or are doing some type of performance within the greater culture that they're participating in.
So to give a very concrete example, charters and legal documents would always have been produced, like literally written down, displayed, and read aloud. That performance was even more important to the legal process than the document. And you can say this of so many different kinds of texts. So what Kyle and I are both interested in is, can we expand the material that theater scholars use by, if we're going to wait around for modern-looking plays like the play of Adam, we're going to wait for a long time. We're going to wait till the 12th century. But if we relax our idea of what counts as theatrical, then we have a ton more material to work with. The other narrative that has kind of hindered the study of medieval theatricality is the narrative that the church is hostile to theater. So when the Roman Empire dissolves, the church, stamps out, actors die or get thrown out or whatever, and people just die, and then so people just sit on their hands for 1,000 years. And of course, this is ridiculous. And with that narrative comes the story that, well, if there is theater in the Middle Ages, it's liturgy, it's liturgical drama, it's inherently boring. Even the people who study it think it's boring, that sort of thing. And we're really trying to push against that. And in fact, Adam is a great example, because threaded throughout Adam is this edgy vernacular play, but interwoven into it is Latin chant. And the Latin chant plays a theatrical role in the production. So it's almost as though the play is using the liturgy as a scaffold, but bursting out of it. And we're working with a really talented set of musicians, directed by Drew Minter, who's a fantastic early music performer and singer. And he's composing or adapting medieval music for the play. So music is going to be a really integral part of the play, as it would have been in the 12th century. And we have not been able to play with that yet.
No,
and that's going to be really exciting.
Let's move into talking more about the production that you'll be doing at the Cloisters in December. We talked a little bit about some of the basics, the fact that you're using only 4 actors, but could you just expand a little bit more upon the general concept? What do you want people to experience? What are they going to see if they come to this?
As director, one of the things that I'm thinking about is how do I both gesture to the medieval, to the historical aspects of this play, which are fun, which are beautiful, aesthetically beautiful, but at the same time provide not only a message for, I think the play has an excellent message that was as poignant and important as it was in the 12th century as it is today. And we touched on some of those things, talking about family, talking about relationships, talking about society and the changes that go on and how you deal with those. But at the same time, I think one of the things that I am really focused on with this production is that medieval theater is fun. And I think that's the biggest thing I want our audiences to take away. That just like we perform Shakespeare, because so many of the characters are memorable and enjoyable, and we love them for all their faults and all of their things that they get into, there's a lot of that going on in medieval theater as well, in medieval plays like the play of Adam. There are great characters, which, if you read it on the surface, might seem a bit two-dimensional or a bit too focused on biblical stories or theological aspects, but once you begin to unpack it a little bit, particularly within performance and for performance, you find that these are representations of the way that the people of the time see themselves. And
very psychologically rich. And
yes.
And the other thing is just thinking about what people would see is that the medieval theater was pre-Brecht. I mean, it was Brecht before Brecht. I mean, there was no fourth wall in the Middle Ages.
No.
And first of all, we're going to be performing this in a beautiful space in the Cloisters, in the Fuente de Dueña Chapel, which is exactly contemporary to the play. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be performing in a 12th century space. So how cool is that? Surrounded by 12th century art.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Couldn't get a better place.
Couldn't get a better place. And we're going to be, the audience is going to be surrounding, the performers will be surrounded by the audience members, constantly interacting with them, very much in the way that original practices of Shakespeare are doing more and more now. That's absolutely the way it would have been done in the medieval period. The Cloisters, if folks have been there at Christmas time, then you know that it's always beautifully decorated with flowers and foliage, and it looks like a medieval garden. And so the Cloister staff are going to be essentially creating a Garden of Eden for us. And really, I've just got to pinch myself. Like,
yes, I know.
So we're going to get to be in this amazing space, which does all the work we need to do with these decorations, and simple but evocative costumes, a few props.
Mm-hmm. But you'll walk into a space that is 12th century. You will be surrounded by sights, smells, and sounds that all feel and seem 12th century. You'll be really surrounded in this kind of 12th century environment, but you'll find yourself wrapped up in a play that feels wholly contemporary. Yeah, and I think that's the experience that we hope to really give our audiences, that we want you to kind of lose yourself in the environment of it, but at the same time, enjoy that and find the fun as a 21st century individual in this wonderfully different type of play. And I think Carol it brings up this fact that it's Brecht before Brecht, and I think that that's what makes the play so fun, is because we almost implicate the audience within the action of the play, and if there are kids there, we're going to get them involved. And so it's one of those things where we encourage our audience to bring younger audience members as well, because there's a lot of fun things that we kind of have planned, and I don't want to give away. I don't want to give away too much, but we really want, as Carol mentioned, we want to engage the audience much like they would have been engaged in the 12th century. But at the same time, I hope that people who do have some theatrical knowledge, particularly if they know Brecht or his theories or any 21st or 20th and 21st century kind of ideas about theater, they're going to find that in a 12th century play. And I promise you, it's not just the way we're thinking about it in performance. This is the way the plays were working. That's what the things that they were doing are very much some of the similar things that Brecht was trying to do in the 20th century, and some of the things that we're still continuing to do, both out of his theories and as we explore the postmodern world. There's a lot of connection there that I think, particularly theater individuals and performance scholars and people who know that will really enjoy and find a lot.
Yeah, and I think that the more that we, as we work to transform the narrative of what medieval theater was, the more you pay attention to the medieval theater, the more you realize that the enclosure of the theater and the creation of the proscenium arch and the distancing of the audience,
it's more limiting,
is and that it's also just such a weird moment. I mean, in other words, that it's like, it's not the Middle Ages that's aberrant, it's the 18th and 19th centuries that's aberrant. It's this weird desire to sort of close the theater off that Brecht releases us from again, but but it had always been there in medieval drama.
Yeah.
So it's really,
and even post-medieval. I mean, that Shakespeare all the way up to probably the 17th century.
I mean, what's different about Shakespeare, as I've argued, is that once you start getting purpose-built structures that contain theater, and that, for example, you have to pay to get into,
Blackfriars.
So, Blackfriars or the Globe even, that creates that economy of theater is a different economy, right? And it also means that some people get to see it and some people don't.
Sure.
And we know, for example, there's a wonderful medieval play called Mankind, which includes a moment which shows us how professional entertainers made money. They actually passed the hat.
Mm-hmm.
They actually, that's how. So, we don't know whether the play of Adam would have been performed by professionals. We think probably just because it's so technically, kind of technically rich. And if this was done by professionals, then there probably was a moment where they, asked people for donations. But yeah, so I think that, what the more we pay attention to the innovativeness of medieval drama, the freshness of it, and try to bring that to audiences, the more people will be wondering, well, why did we ever want to be in a darkened theater in the first place, right? Of course, this wonderful theatrical effects can happen in a darkened theater. I'm not saying that, there are lovely things that can happen, but the playfulness of the interaction of the actors and the audience is something
Absolutely.
that we both just care about a lot.
A reminder that the play of Adam will be performed at the Met Cloisters. You can see it on December 17th or December 18th. There are shows at 1 and 3 p.m. on both days, and we'll post a link to the event site in the show notes. Carol and Kyle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having
If you'd
us.
like to continue today's conversation, please visit howlround.com and follow HowlRound and @TheaterHistory on Twitter. A big thank you to the staff at HowlRound who make this show possible. Our theme music is The Black Crook Gallop, which comes to us courtesy of the New York Public Library Libretto Project and Adam Roberts. Thanks as well to Tip Kress, who designed our logo. And finally, thank you for listening.